Hey creators, welcome to the Designer Tech channel, where I, Warwick, help you with your design or just creative projects, bring them to life through the use of technology, through coding and different ideas around technology. This is the third part of a video series around the Unity game engine user interface elements and how to control the RectTransform in particular. In this particular video, we're going to look at how to animate changing the layout with the AnimatableLayout component. This is a component that you could reuse in a project directly, or you might take this code and you might change it in some way. The code is part of a project on GitHub. The license is an MIT license, so you're free to use it. So the link to that project will be in the description below, so feel free to use that and take a look at the code, and if you want to try and follow along with the video, that works too. Okay, so now let's take a look at the Animatable layout, which in some ways is similar to that rescaler we just looked at, but for one thing it does a smooth transition, but also it's more about moving things to either the left or the right side. So actually let's take a quick look as a recap. So here we have all these objects. It initializes to set up in expanded mode by default. We can, in fact, this is the component over here. We can change a bunch of things like the expanded state or not at startup and so forth. But if I hit the collapse button, we can see it collapses over to the left, and expand, I can change it to be to the right. Collapse, now it collapses to the right. We can change the collapse width, which is sort of defines in terms of the portion of the parent panel, defines the sort of vertical break point between left and right. So at the moment it's 0.5, so it's exactly the middle. If I make it 0.4, in fact let's make it 0.3 to really highlight. So if we make it back to left, you'll see when I collapse it's now sort of 30% of the width of the parent panel, and if I make it right then it'll be 70% because it's from that 30% point on. So if I collapse, you can see that's the remaining 70%. So you got this nice smooth transition. You can see here that it's either dealing with these TextMesh Pro objects, so like this, but also it's dealing with a panel, and because of the way the panel's set up, the TextMesh Pro object inside it auto sizes automatically, so that's why it changes its font size automatically, which is why it is kind of smooth. Yeah. Okay. So now the thing is, it's worth saying that something like this could be done with Mechanim, but having code set up like this makes it pretty easy to manage. So sometimes if you want to thinking about the application of this, if you wanted to make it nice and simple and very repeatable, then using code is a good solution. Okay, so let's have a look at the code now. So we have the AnimatableLayout component. Okay, so here's the component. It's in Designer Tech AnimatableLayout. So if I go through the motions of adding it, so it's added to this UI panel already, but if I just go through here, you can see under Designer Tech, AnimatableLayout, that's the thing. And then what? So then we have our editor variables, such as the array of UI objects to layout. So it doesn't automatically, that could be a nice modification to this, that it just detects all of the children of the top level children of the panel. So here, but the way it's set up now, you have to tell it how big the array needs to be, and then you have to drag in. So you can see first message was dragged into here. Let me show you. So if I do this, or I can hit delete, delete, delete. This is how I set it up. So when I type in 3 here, you'll get 3 empty slots, and then you just drag in your objects like so. Now the other thing is actually, so let's delete that again. If I change the order, right, so if I can, because of the way I've done it, I could basically change the presentation. So by changing their sequence, the one that's listed at the top here, background box, yeah, this should actually sort of turn everything upside down. So let's have a look at that. And it did not. That's interesting. Ah, because I had, what? That's really interesting. I had the background box twice. What? How did that happen? First message. Drag that into the bottom. Okay, try that again. Much more like it. So now the background box is at the top, then the second, and the first, and that's only because of the order that I listed them here. And if we collapse, not there, this one, collapse there, expand here, you know, and they work just as they should. So things worth noting in the Animatable layout is that it doesn't attempt to control any TextMesh Pro text objects in the hierarchy, in the UI hierarchy, which means that if you need the objects to automatically resize themselves, then you need to hit the auto size, in terms of font size that is, you need to enable the auto font size, which is a good idea. It would be probably a good idea to add that could be a nice feature, and obviously the rescaler already has this kind of feature, so that could be used here as well. But really what I wanted to demonstrate with the Animatable layout was just a smooth transition from an expanded state to the collapsed state, and potentially back again. So what are the key takeaways here? So obviously there's initialization of the layout to be either expanded or collapsed. Then there's triggering a change from one state to the other, being from collapsed to expanded or from expanded to collapsed. And so that's what these begin functions are about. And then there's the transition itself. So the transition, which takes place over time using fixed update, and then and is actually managed by this progress float variable, which is literally from 0 progress to 1.0 progress. So when you're at 1.0, it's finished, and at that point it's completed. It's either fully expanded or fully collapsed. This is ready variable, just by the way, is there to protect against attempting to make a transition or manage a transition when the object is not well configured. So for instance, if we look at how does it determine, we have a good isGoodConfig method, and the isGoodConfig method basically looks to see that the array of objects to lay out is not null and has a non-zero length, and the fractions array is not null and actually has a length that matches the objects to lay out. And during a wake, if that's determined to be true, that it is ready, then it will actually function. If not, then it will silently not function. So for instance, then at start, at the first frame, it's going to get the heights for mode, and it's going to essentially set the expanded layout state. So by default it will make it expanded. Now, in terms of, well, how does the actual transition work, the animation itself? So at 10 times a second, it's going to evaluate the fix update, which is just a Unity thing. This is kind of like normal update, but it's a little bit leaner. It's really intended for physics calculations. But in this case, I'm using it to have a less often called version of update, really. Okay, so in here, basically, if it's expanding, then it's going to progress expand. If it's collapsing, then it will progress the collapse. And that's basically all it does here. And it makes sure it's not already completed. Okay. So if it's progressing, expanding or collapsed, then the pattern is basically the same. It computes the progress, gets the fractions for that mode, whether it's expanding or collapsing. And this is actually blended, so that way it's going to blend between the heights, the collapsed and expanded heights, which actually is, so there's actually two kinds of blending going on. There's sort of horizontal tweening, horizontal blending, and then there's the vertical blending. And that just gives us a smooth transition both in height and width. Then essentially if it's complete, then so if it was progressing collapse, if it has completed, then it sets the value to collapsed. And likewise, if it's progressing expand and it determines that it's complete, and that basically just means is the underscore progress variable equal to or greater than 1.0, then it will set the state to expanded. But if it isn't complete, then it'll do the tweening, the horizontal tweening for the layout, and it will apply the already tweened heights to it, and it's using the anchor layout util class, which is just a static class, and all the methods in there are static. And that is really how that works. That's the whole thing in a nutshell. So the magic is actually in the anchor layout util, which is this class here, which does some of the tweening and deals with expanded layout. So well, expanded layout is what's used at the start to give us an expanded layout and just initially render the object as expanded, and tweening is for dealing with the horizontal between values or blended values. The other part that has all the magic is the anchor calculations, which just gives us the min and max anchor values. So you have the expanded x anchor method, which just needs a margin, and then it's able to provide back min x and max x values, which in Unity in the RectTransform, that corresponds exactly to the min x and max x there. And then you have the same thing for a here's the x anchor calculation where there could be some tweening involved, okay, or where there's basically it's somewhere between expanded or collapsed, and it's taking the progress along that journey or along that spectrum into account to determine what min and max would be. So in this case, right, it's taking the alignment because it needs to know is it supposed to collapse toward the left or the right. It needs to know how far progressed it is in terms of the collapse or expansion. It needs to know, in fact, it always treats it as collapse, and expansion is just 1 minus collapse. And we'll see that back in the animatable layout. And the collapse width is the other thing that's needed, and so that width is the boundary along the x-axis that defines left versus right as a fraction of the parent panel or parent object. And you can see that I've been a fan of using the lambda method body, right? So the sort of lambda function expression or lambda method expression. So this is something that was introduced in C#, I think in version 7. And this is the same as having a I could wrap this in a, let me just show, I could wrap this in the normal curly brackets and just put the word return in front, and it would be exactly the same. That means exactly the same thing, but using the Lambda version of it. It's a little briefer. You know, I'm saving on these brackets, and it sort of lends itself to a more functional programming way of thinking. But if you're not into functional programming, the simplest way to think about why I do this is it's a little bit less noise, a little bit less characters to type. But it basically means the same thing. So if you call this and provide these parameters, it's going to give you a value which it determines first of all what the alignment is, and then if it's left, it's going to call the x anchor left align method with the same parameters, and if it's right aligned, it will call the x anchor right align method with the same parameters. And that's how this works. So then you can see those methods are below, x anchor left align, and you can see the way that this is working. It's determining what the max value needs to be, because the min value will just be the margin, and it just needs to figure out what the max value would be. So it's got to take the collapsed width into account, the progress, and then it's basically blending between the progress times the collapsed width, and 1 minus the progress of the full width if it's left aligned. Then if it's right aligned, it's taking the progress of the collapsed width, and then it's 1 minus the progress times the margin. So, and then it's applying that to the left, to the min value. And the right hand side of the anchor, which is the max x value, will be the full width less the margin. So that's basically how that whole thing works. So that gives you back the for anchor based calculations. So if we look at the RectTransform, that means we've got the min x value, the min and the max x value is computed here. As a result of that, go back to AnimatableLayout. The heights were already calculated down here by doing the AnimatableLayout util get tweened fraction by layout. So this one is where it's going to blend. It's doing a linear tween of heights based on is it collapsed and the fraction, and also the collapsed height and the expanded height. So it's doing that tweening between these two heights. Okay. And it's going to do that for each. So here we're doing this in a loop overall, and that's how we work through each object. Yep. So hang on. So the actual tween horizontal layout will actually use this process loop and provided all of the parameters required to apply to the actual RectTransforms to actually apply these anchor values. So here, because it's through the two different, the horizontal and vertical tweening, it's figured out what the left x value, the right x value is. It's got the height fractions, and here's the array of RectTransforms to apply it to, and it's got the anchor margin. So based on that, if we look at the process loop, we can see it's working from top to bottom. The top of the anchor is always the max y value. So the max y value here is the top, and it's working toward 0. And so that's why it's subtracting height from, right? So the bottom y, it's subtracting the height to calculate the next bottom y value, and then it's determining the anchor. So the anchor min, this is a vector 2. Anchor min will have the min x and min y values. Anchor max will have the max x and max y values. And then we're basically just doing the set position and anchors, which is another utility function which we've used earlier, or this class we've used before. So we've got the RectTransform util class. So that's going to set the position and anchors using the specific RectTransform from the array of UI objects, which is an array of RectTransforms. It's going to provide the anchor min and anchor max values. It's going to basically just use a fixed center pivot, which is a 0.5, 0.5 pivot. So like this one, we've got 0.5, 0.5. This is the offset, so it's using an offset. So when you have, let's find an object. I think back up here, the UI panel. Yep. So where we up here, this is all driven by anchors. You've got the left, top, right, bottom offset values appear in the inspector, and that's what this set position and anchors uses, and which is why we're setting the offsets to 0. And here the scale is being set to 100%. So this RectTransform util class has _100 PC, meaning 100% scale, which is essentially a vector 2 with 1 and 1 in it. Then we calculate the next top y, and then we go through another loop. So this is just looping through, setting up those anchor values, and then doing a set position and anchors, and that's all this is doing. So that's how the tween horizontal layouts works. And the expanded layout is basically the same thing, but cut down, because it doesn't have to do any tweening. It's just forcing everything to be expanded, and that's called pretty much at the start. So we'll see here that's used only at the start frame. It's setting it initially to the expanded state. So that gives you, for the animatable layout, that gives you an idea how that works. That's literally the whole thing of how it manages its state. We covered the change trigger before, so that's how it manages its state and how it tracks where it is and progressing from either a fully expanded or partially expanded, partially collapsed state, and then works its way to the opposite part of it. So if it's gone from expanded all the way through to collapsed, or if it's collapsed initially, then progressing towards expanded. And once you set it off, right, so the begin expansion and begin collapsed, it will continue working until it reaches the final state. So if you say begin collapse, then it will reach the collapsed state and then be ready to begin expansion. Okay, so that is how that works. And we've now covered all that code. Now what can you do? It means that you can now use, from the GitHub project, you'll be able to use the animatable layout if that solves a problem for you. You'll be able to also use the utility classes and just look at the components here as an example. So if you want to set, through code, if you want to set the RectTransform to use an anchor-based layout, then you'll be able to do that. If you want to use a more of a position-based layout, then you'll be able to do that as well. So if you want to just set width and height and actually set the anchors and pivots to be, say, the left or the top, and anchor it based on a certain side of the RectTransform, then you'll be able to do that as well. So in many ways, this project gives you a demonstration of how to do all those things. So in a nutshell, when it comes to using TextMesh Pro and UI objects and controlling them from code, TextMesh Pro does a lot of things almost automatically for you, and it's really the RectTransform, I think, that's where most of the fancy layout work will come from. And if you wanted to try alternatives to using code, you could also use Mechanim or other types of animation, like maybe Timeline, and achieve this without code. That is another option. Okay, so that was the Animatable Layout component and a tour through all of the utility classes and how they work together to make the animation work. You got a sense of how the progress was pushed or how the progress was controlled over time, so that the animation was triggered, then it progressed to a point of either full expansion or to a point of collapse. And so now you should have an idea of how to either control that or set it up in your own scenes. But also, if you wanted to, say, take the utility classes and change the way the animation works, you should be able to do that yourself. Okay, remember the GitHub project, there's a link to that below in the description, and you're free to use that in your own projects. And if you like the video, that'd be great if you hit the old like button, and if you want to subscribe for more videos, of course, that would be great. If you want to share the video and let your friends know, that would of course be appreciated. So I hope you like this video. I hope you find something useful in it, and if you have any ideas, please put them in the comments. It's always great to get some questions or ideas about how technology could help you with your own creative projects. Thank you for watching.